Well, hey, and welcome back. We are in chapter 2 in our study through 1 Timothy, and we've said that this week we're going to set up our time looking at the roles of men and women in the church and how they can step into God-given roles as they're aiming to pursue love as the church. And so last time we saw how men should prioritize prayer over quarreling and fighting, and how women should prioritize good works over good looks so that they're not a distraction to other women in the church. And so let's continue on in the next couple of verses and see where Paul goes with this. He says, "Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet." Now, what is Paul getting at here? These verses come off a little bit harsh, especially towards women. And I think it's important that we dig into these passages, not skip over them. And these are verses that people will bring up to try to discredit the church and say that the church is outdated and doesn't respect or respond to women properly. And I think that's a misunderstanding of what Paul is getting at here. There's a couple different hints in that. The first is that he says, let a woman learn. That's actually not taking dignity away from women. That's actually putting more dignity on women, their ability to learn, especially in this first century context where much wasn't expected of women in some of the culture. Yet here he's saying because of Christ and what he has done in the context of the church, women have an opportunity to learn. Women have an opportunity to grow and to be edified in the context of the church. Now he says, let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. And we have this idea of submission in a couple of places in the New Testament. Ephesians 5 is a good place to look for that. And submission in our minds is sometimes carrying a really negative connotation. But in the scriptures, submission is something that is a picture of the relationship between Christ and the church. And so I would encourage you, dig into some of those other passages of submission. See how submission works. See the ways that submission is a picture of God's good design for men and women. And in the next verse, he says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. Now, is this to say that women should never say anything in the context of the church or never have any input on anything? I actually don't think so. I think sometimes we can get hung up on some of these words of remaining quiet and not having authority over a man. And sometimes we miss what Paul is really getting at here. He's talking to women, yes, but you can hear the undertones of these verses of Paul calling men to step up into roles of authority and leadership. And this is actually a really good thing. This is expecting a lot of men. And when you think about the ways that roles of men and women has been muddied in our culture, sometimes what we see is a lack of men stepping into the responsibility of leadership and authority in a lot of different settings. And yet God's design is for men to take on the responsibility of a family, the responsibility of leadership in business or in different areas of life, and certainly in responsibility to the church. And this is a burden on men that they need to be ready and willing to actually take on themselves to step into this type of leadership. And as we're thinking about these things, you can even see the way that we structured things here at Redeemer. We have pastors and we have elders, and those are roles that are reserved for men. We're following these exact scriptures when we're thinking about who is stepping up and leading in our churches. And we think that that really is the role and the burden of men to take on that type of responsibility and that type of leadership. And listen, that's not to say that women are not important in the church. If you're getting that from these scriptures, you're missing it. The role of women in the church is critically important. And the role of men in the church as leaders and as shepherds and pastors is critically important. And so if you're a guy, you need to think about what are some of those areas that I need to step into a responsibility of leadership. And if you're a lady, you can actually hear these verses and take some time and learn what God is really getting at here. And hopefully, as we move on in the next couple verses, you're going to see as women the ways that Christ actually redeems women for his purposes and for his church. And when we step into and better understand these roles as men and women, I think we're really going to see how God has the church aimed at love.